You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is a communications trainer and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation.
Alper, today we have a guest on the podcast, Tom Tran. He's back on the podcast, and many of you...
Welcome back, Tom.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Tom. And many of you listeners remember Tom from his recent appearance on our podcast, but for those of you who don't, I'll give you a few reminders about Tom. Tom is an associate brand manager for a pharmaceuticals company. And before that, he got his MBA from the University of Michigan. Tom does a lot of mentoring for recently graduated students. Many of them recently minted MBAs. And that directly ties into today's topic, which we'll get to in a moment. But before we get started, Tom, just so I don't forget to do this later, if people want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on my personal blog, tomkytran.com, or shoot me an email, or find me on LinkedIn.
And okay, so on to the topic for today. It's almost the start of the summer internship season, which means that pretty soon we'll have a lot of people building their internship presentations. Tell us more about that process, Tom. And in particular, I, for one, would like to know what are a couple things that really need to go into those internship presentations, and why do they need to be there?
Yeah, so most MBA level internships will have a presentation component, and it's the deliverable at the end of your summer internship. But the goal of summer internship is to see if you're a good fit for the company and to show what you can do over the course of the summer. So the presentation is one of those ways to do that. But the ultimate goal is to get a return offer. And so I have 3 tips for students who are starting their summer internship. The first is, show your work early and often. I think as soon as you start, have those one-on-ones, get to know people on your team, get to know people on other teams, get to know the partners that your team works with, and then start putting ideas down in PowerPoint in the presentation. You don't have to have things perfectly figured out, but the sooner you do it, the easier it is, because what happens is as you go and meet with people in the one-on-ones, after you get to know them a little bit and their story and their background, it's nice to have something that they can react to, because that just helps you iterate so much faster. What happened? So 3 years ago, I was an MBA intern at Dell in Austin. Mm-hmm. And what I saw during the course of the internship was that there's some students who waited to have the big reveal at the midpoint and at the end.
Okay.
Without saving it up.
By the way, let me interrupt you for a second. When you say the big reveal, what do you mean there?
Yeah, I think it's easy to kind of like want to make things perfect before you share it with your manager or someone on your team, and to kind of, keep working on it without getting that feedback. But when you do that, the first time you get the feedback, you won't have enough time to kind of continue iterating. So I think the sooner you can share what you're working on and how you're thinking about a problem, you just get such great feedback, because people that you're working with know so much more. They know where all the resources are. And more importantly, they can tell you and give you really, really tangible ideas that you can work with. So the earlier you can show something, the faster that they can give you feedback they can work into the presentation. And it makes you more collaborative. People love giving advice and tips. And it's very flattering when you ask, a coworker or a potential manager or someone on a different team for their feedback on your presentation. So that's the first big idea. Mm-hmm. Show your work early and often.
Okay. And you mentioned, I think you were talking about the importance of networking with other team members in other departments, and including other team members in other departments. Is that correct? Was I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, because during the summer internship, you're also trying to figure out if the company is right for you. Is the culture right for you? Are people collaborative, or is it really, really competitive? So when I was in my internship, my manager and the onboarding process, I had to have, one-on-ones with maybe 20 or 30 people. And that was just such a great way to get to know other functions and kind of discover, like, if you got an internship in marketing, but you're also curious about finance or operations, that's your chance. And when you have that, when you're in the internship program, you have kind of like a free pass to meet with whoever you want, even up to the director or VP if that's what you decide to do. So it's just such a great opportunity to learn and just soak everything in.
Okay.
And build those relationships. Because what happens is at the end of your internship, everyone who you interacted with basically gives you a thumbs up or thumbs down for a return offer. So the more relationships you have during that time, the more relationships you've built over the course of the summer, the more likely you'll have people kind of in your court.
So I've got a question for you, Tom. So you've mentioned the need to be networking, and you've also mentioned that other people in other departments might be giving this intern a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So, I know that in every company and in every group, the process is going to be slightly different. But in your experience, in what you see in front of you, how does this selection process happen? Deciding who gets to come back or who gets an offer and who doesn't get an offer. How does that happen?
Yeah, so I've been on both sides of it as an intern and then as a full-time employee, kind of putting in the vote. So last summer, we had all the interns wrap up with a big final presentation in front of the VPs, the current ABMs, the brand managers, et cetera. And at the end, we all had a form to fill out, a very detailed form about, what was it like to work with this person? How did the presentation do? What was their impact? So it was very quantified. And obviously, a lot of it will depend on the business needs and your manager. So the most important relationship during the summer is with your direct manager, because they're going to have the biggest say. Because if they say, this is not a good hire, no one else is really going to go to bat for you. So you need your manager to kind of be on your side.
True.
And then everyone else, all the other recent grads, those are like the best resources because they just went through the experience and they're going to have like the best tips on how you can be successful and how you need to frame up certain issues and how you can talk about certain business problems in ways that resonate with the key stakeholders in the org.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very meritocratic overall in my experience.
Okay. And Alper, you mentioned that you had a question about the big reveal. So what's on your mind about that?
It was not a question as much as a realization that I was also guilty of that big reveal before. So I would prepare for a big presentation. Well, big for me. I would prepare for a presentation, not show anything to anyone, expect to have a stellar show, and at the end impress everyone with some big reveal or a big bang or something. And most of the time that wouldn't happen. And that used to come with disappointment for not creating the effect that you want, as well as the hours or the days or the weeks that you spent. So, Tom, I would like to ask you, in your capacity as one of the people who were listening to these presentations, did you ever see that? Like, did you see someone keeping something like a big reveal towards the end and maybe not working out? Did you ever find yourself in this situation, either as the presenter or the listener, let's say?
Yeah, I would say, a few other interns when I was at Dell kind of took that approach. They saved their work. They worked on it really, really hard, but they didn't really shop it around and get feedback. Because I think what happens when you actually show people is that you get their buy-in and their support. So they feel like they've had a say in your work. And so when you actually finally present it at the very end, they also have ownership and pride in what you present because they were able to be part of it in an indirect way. So I think that's really the benefit of showing your work often and early.
They have some skin in the game, I think, when you show them beforehand, because they don't want to revert back on their ideas or their position, maybe, and they might end up supporting you more. Yeah.
Exactly.
Rather than saying, I don't like it. That's it. I have no previous interaction with you. I have no prior communication with you. I have no prior information on the topic. So nice work, but I don't like it. I think it's easier to just say pass at that moment.
I think this is a really interesting area, and I would like to ask Tom a question about that. Is that okay with you, Alper?
Of course.
So Tom, what do you think is a good stage? You mentioned phrases like it's important to shop around your presentation. It's important to show your presentation to other people as you're developing it. What stage do you think it's good to get their buy-in on the presentation? Are we talking like before you start making slides, when you have a text-based outline of what you're going to say, or does it need to be like 90% done with the slides made and the graphics? When do you think is the right time to start shopping it around?
Yeah, I think, you could go too far in any extreme, but when I was at Dell over the summer, it was really helpful to have something going into these one-on-ones and these meetings. And I think it would be a mistake to kind of come with something too well-defined, too perfect, because then people feel a little bit more hesitant about giving their true feedback because it looks like you're done.
Okay.
So no one wants to make you feel bad.
True.
And so they'll kind of hold back a little bit of what they're really thinking. So it is helpful to come with something sketched out, and it's a little bit of a personal preference. If you're really early on, an outline in a Word document is totally fine. My preference is to just start putting things down in PowerPoint because that is going to be the final deliverable. And then if it doesn't work out, I just throw it in the appendix and have it as something I can reference later.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, if you bring something rough, I think that's kind of the sweet spot early on in your internship. But as you're approaching kind of, week 8 of 9 weeks,
sure,
then you want to show something that's a little bit more, closer to the finished product. Otherwise, it looks like you haven't been doing anything the last,
sure,
presentation. So it's important to know where you are in that internship timeline and what would be kind of appropriate at each point.
Okay.
But no matter what, you gotta just get people to tell you if you're going down the right path or wrong path, because you really don't know, because all the people that you'll be working with will have been there and probably know the answer to the internship questions that you are being tasked to look into.
Okay.
To be quite frank, it's a little bit of the summer internship. The summer internship is sometimes, you can just think of it as an extended interview. So by kind of showing people what you're working on, incorporating their feedback, that kind of shows how you are as a potential colleague. So it's also about the process, versus just the actual final PDF that you send to everyone.
Okay. Yeah, and before we wrap up for today, so we've got time for just one more question. Do you have something on your mind, Alper, or should I jump in?
I have just one question to ask to Tom.
Go for it.
For example, would you recommend getting a short feedback in the beginning stages? Let's say not as a hypothetical idea, but I have some slides, extremely basic slides, like white slides with back text on them, to show, okay, this is what I imagine the topic is going to be. This is what I imagine the flow is going to be. What is your input on that? And then I get the feedback. I go work on it, days, weeks, months, or whatever. And before the presentation itself, before I put all the tedious work, let's say, the nitty-gritty details of the slide design, I go back to them one more time and say, okay, this is the 3/4 finished draft, and before I beautify things, I wanted to run it by you. So is this something doable? Can we do it? Can we ask for their feedback more than once?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think with your direct manager, especially with the summer internship, it's also for you. You're still a student, and so it's totally acceptable to ask for as much feedback as you need. And each manager is different, so it's important to calibrate that. But with my manager over the summer, we had a weekly check-in, and every check-in, I brought something new to show him to get his feedback on.
Oh, okay.
Because that way I knew by the end, the presentation was going to be exactly kind of what he had imagined. And he would be a co-contributor or co-creator of it, even though I was doing, most of the work, but I had his guidance. And so, yeah, honestly, I think it is the more feedback you get, the more often, the more likely you'll get a return offer. If there's like one thing to take away from everything we've talked about, obviously you can take that to an extreme, but once a week is totally acceptable.
Okay, that's great.
So we've got a wrap up here pretty soon, but I've got one more question for you, Tom. So we just have a couple minutes to go over it. So in these internship presentations, what do you typically see that you think, or what do you not see that's getting left out? And you're thinking, man, you really need to include a few minutes or a slide on topic XYZ, and you're not doing it. Your audience totally wants you to do it. What do you see missing that you think, man, these people really need to put it in there?
Yeah, I think the thing that can be missing that shows up is whether or not you've kind of whether or not you've taken the time to really get feedback and get all the potential questions. Because what you'll get in the final presentation is the executives or the VPs will ask you questions. So if you've done a lot of practice and you've kind of got their buy-in, the questions you get should be very easy. But if you've kind of worked a little bit more independently and you haven't gone and gotten feedback from people outside of your team or on a different cross-functional team, then those questions come up at the end and you might be caught off guard.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can show up. So the more that you've iterated over the course of the summer, the better your presentation will be when you actually give it, especially when it comes to the Q&A.
Sure. Excellent. Well, thank you,
I like
Tom.
that.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Tom. And I guess that about wraps it up for today. So thank you for joining us on the podcast, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and good luck to all the interns this summer.
Yes, good luck to all the interns.
Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.